When you have new appliances, there's a lot of excitement and people think, oh, my cooking is going to be so much better. Well, it will be, but only if you take one important step, and that's really learn about the tools you're cooking with. Take, for example, your new Bosch ovens. These really are state-of-the-art in terms of technology. So the first thing you'll want to learn is which mode to use for the different types of cooking. One thing I really love about these new Bosch ovens is that they have the essential cooking modes, and then they have another option that's called more modes, so that you're not going to be confused looking at the control panel. So I'm going to take you through the modes and give you some tips for working with each one. When we use bake mode, it's radiant heat. Heat's coming from the bottom of the oven and also the top of the oven. Now, bake mode is really good for baking, but certain types of baking. If you think about baking, you start off with a wet batter, and what has to happen? You dry it out. Well, bake, regular bake, is a terrific mode for doing that. Not my favorite mode for roasting chickens and turkeys, but fabulous for cakes and breads. So bake is really important to have as an option to have the full spectrum of tools available to you. When you're baking, you can follow the recipe instructions and bake in the center of the oven. Until you get to know your oven, my recommendation is that you always set the timer for a few minutes lower than the recipe time, just because everybody's oven is so different. Don't be confused between convection bake and regular bake. When we use convection bake, heat is being circulated around the oven by the convection fan. When you cook with convection, there's a lot of moisture retention in food. You can cook on multiple racks at one time, and there's actually no transference of flavor. When we use convection baking for our baking, it enables us to do that multi-rack cooking. Say you're making a cake that requires 3 or 4 layers of cake. That means you can get all of those layers in there at one time. You're also going to find this is a great mode if you're cooking breads, pies, or pastry. Why? Because in this mode, you're using more heat from the bottom as well as the convection circulating heat. See, these are really great fine-tuning tools. Now, a little tip I have is that if you've baked something in convection bake and it looks like it's really cooked on the outside but it's not quite set, you can change the mode back to regular bake for the last few minutes so you don't get additional browning on your baked items, but it finishes it and dries it out perfectly. Your Bosch oven also features a mode convection multi-level. Now, personally, I love cooking on multiple racks at one time. Why? Because it means I can cook a complete meal in the oven. Remember, there's no flavor transference, and I don't even have to be in the kitchen while it's cooking. Now remember, if you're using the convection multi-level mode, the heat is coming from the convection element at the back of the oven. So the heat penetrates the food from the edge to the core. You'll find that when you turn your oven on, you're always going to have a default temperature setting. It's my recommendation that you follow the oven's temperature setting and not the recipes, because this oven has been tested thoroughly by the Bosch technicians and culinary experts, and they have determined that you'll get the best results by using these temperatures with these modes. Now, when you're cooking meats and you want to add in vegetables or other foods in the convection multi-level mode, just remember, get the meats going first, because meats need to rest for about 10 minutes before you can actually slice them. So you want your food all to be ready to serve at the same time. Just give yourself that extra 10 minutes on the meat. Now, convection roast is going to use the same heating elements in the oven as convection bake, but now the elements are going to come on with maximum intensity because this mode is designed for when you need to cook a larger cut of meat. Now, your oven is equipped with a meat probe, and while I find that the meat probes are really helpful for large cuts of meat, they're not as effective with small cuts of meat. but you're going to love the meat probe when you cook a large turkey or a prime rib or lamb roast. Just make sure that the probe doesn't touch the bone and that you put it in the thickest part of the meat. Now, everybody always asks, does my food cook faster in convection? The larger cuts of meat, there'll be a definite time savings, but it's still going to take you an hour to roast a chicken. It's still going to take you between 25 to 30 minutes to cook your pork tenderloin through. Now, you'll notice that the meats that I'm roasting are always on a rack in a shallow pan. So we elevate the meat, we have it sitting up on a rack so that the heat can circulate evenly around it and cook perfectly from the edge to the core. I find using the oven broil pan is often a good solution. Now, when it comes to roasting a turkey in convection, it takes us exactly 2 hours to roast a 20-pound turkey with no stuffing. We don't turn it, we don't baste it, we don't brine it. We just let convection circulate around it and brown it to perfection. Now, many people like to do their high heat meat cooking outside on the barbecue. And while that's a great tool, maybe in winter you'd prefer to do some broiling inside. Your oven is equipped with 2 broil modes. One is regular broil, where you'll have heat coming just from the broil element directly onto the food. And the other is convection broil, which can be found under more modes. If I'm broiling steak, I do use the convection broil feature because I know that when I use convection, there'll be more moisture retention in the food. But if you're broiling a small tray of shrimp with some vegetables, regular broil will do a great job. As long as you set your rack position in the correct position so the food isn't too close to the broil element, you won't have any issues. Now, obviously, at high temperatures, you will see some smoke if you're going to be broiling a steak, but there is a catalytic converter in your oven. It's there to absorb grease and particulate matter in the self-cleaning cycle, but it also absorbs all that smoke and grease in the high heat broil cycles. So, know your tools, use them effectively, and your cooking overall will be a dream.